right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be an awesome podcast today. Right before I get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you want to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jon Emaus. Am I pronouncing that correctly, by the way?
Emaus.
Jon Emaus. I don't know if you've seen any of my podcasts, but I'm going to run this episode exactly like I've done all the others. I don't want to know about who you are today yet. I want to take the story all the way back. I want you to tell me where you were born and raised, what you were like as a young man, like what were the things that were really influential to you, what kind of shaped you as a young man, what did you think life was going to be like, and then we'll slowly build the story up to today. All right, so all you.
Well, thank you for having me first. I appreciate it. I am Jon Emaus, 46 years old. Basic background, born in Grand Rapids area, but was part of a split family, taken by my father to San Diego initially when I was 6 months old. He was a Vietnam veteran who joined up with some of his Army buddies and eventually moved up to the Los Angeles area with what became my mom in California. They became married when I was about 3.5, 4 years old. My biological mother, my older sister, stayed here in Michigan. My family grew up in California, so I was a kid between both states growing up. Interestingly enough, even growing up in California in the 80s, was that even in the gang areas, which my father owned an industrial silkscreen company, so I come from a family of entrepreneurs and businessmen. I was still raised on the Detroit Tigers, the bad boy Pistons from Detroit. University of Michigan football was the biggest influence growing up from a sports mentality. I was a huge baseball player. In California, we enjoy the ability to play year-round, as opposed to Michigan. We don't really have a winter off-season. And then eventually I moved back from California, from Los Angeles, to Kentwood. I went to East Kentwood High School for my last 2 years of high school, primarily to get residency to go watch University of Michigan football as a student.
So when you said you had a split home, did you spend like a couple years there and a couple years here? Did you do summers in one location? Help me understand that dynamic.
So the vast majority of it was the latter, which is I lived in California, went to school there, and I would come here to visit in the summers. So this is the place where I came to learn to fish, and not exceptionally well, right? I own strengths and weaknesses. I stay in my lane, but where you come to fish, enjoy a lot of the outdoors. We would camp occasionally up in the mountains in California, but their activities were more, organized sports, downhill skiing, those kinds of things. And so that was more of a summer and kind of an every other Christmas.
Did you have a good relationship in both homes? With split homes can be very difficult. Did you have a good relationship with your stepmom and your father in California, and also your biological mother and stepfather here? Were the homes, not divided, not chaotic, or was it a difficult childhood?
It was a difficult childhood, but I tended to overall enjoy a good relationship with all my parents. It was my parents who didn't get along well. It usually, and I still find it to this day, in some of the areas that I've worked, is that it's the parents, not the children, who have a hard time adapting to those changing roles and those relationships. And very educational for me, my father being a far removed Irish Catholic, and my mom in California being Reformed Jew. So we had both in our house growing up. You had Hanukkah and you had Christmas. We would have a small thing on Easter, but also celebrate Passover and Yom Kippur. And I never went to temple or did any of those things, but raised in a very diverse household, even religiously.
So it sounds like you spent most of your time in California. Like
Yes.
you said, you were here just during the summer seasons. You're back home, you're fishing, you're enjoying what Michigan has to offer. Did any religion or ideology attach to you at a young age? Were you kind of just, because it sounds like what I'm hearing is you're a kid that is viewing so many different perspectives, and you're witnessing controversy, you're witnessing discourse, you're witnessing positive influence, probably negative influence. So you have a really broad scope on the world, multiple religions. A lot of kids grow up under one filter, right? Like they look through There's certain lens that was provided to them. This is how you should see the world. You were almost given a point where you had to question and look at a lot of different beliefs. Did any one thing call out to you individually, or what were like the big things that helped you with identity at a young age?
I think from that perspective, the one thing that stuck with me first was that the concept of spirituality, right? But also the concept of kind of understanding that not everyone has the same exact same set of beliefs, right? And that the one thing that was never questioned, that was always accepted in my household, was that concept of accepting the fact that people can believe different things. People can find their own way. They can find their own spirituality. They can, and that was an underlying, probably one of the best early educational influences I ever had on understanding, the concept of diversity as a nation, right? That people are free to find their own way in terms of whether it's spirituality, whether it's philosophy, whether it's education, their friends. That kind of bled over into almost everything in terms of what people have for personal preferences. Was that, and it's one of the things that I love about this country, right, is that we have the freedom to find your own way, to choose what is right and what fits well for you. So it definitely taught me the concept of empathy and understanding, right, to hearing different points of view, to respecting the fact that not everybody's going to believe the same thing. And that's okay. That's actually a good thing. And I learned a lot, from the Jewish side of my family. I was absolutely welcomed and loved as a family member growing up. But it was never really an invitation to convert. There was never an invitation that if I ever wanted to go to temple or to see these things, I could. But so interestingly, I'm bookended by two sisters. My older sister, who's 100% biological here in Michigan. My younger sister is the half-sister between my father and my mother in California. Well, she was raised from the Jewish religion. So she did have a bat mitzvah. We had both, but it was very natural growing up, right? Having that diversity of different belief systems, and I think it was a strength for me in dealing with most people going forward.
Yeah, 100%. I remember when I was growing up, like the words melting pot was used constantly. You remember that? And we took a lot of pride in that. We took pride in that America was this unity of this large group of people. I mean, the First Amendment is breaks that ideology down, is that we have the freedom of speech because we may differ, but civil discourse and discussion is crucial to a healthy society. We have the freedom to have the right religion, or our religion choice, whatever that may be, but you have the freedom to choose. It's not like you will believe this or else, right? So like you were almost witnessing the First Amendment and the ideals that we were embodying firsthand experience. Where it's easy to hear about those things, like, hey, we're a melting pot, there's a lot of diversity, there's this, that, and the other thing, and then actually living it and being like, wow, this is fascinating. I'm seeing people that are clearly different in their beliefs, but if they can treat each other with respect and not, ostracize me if I don't follow one ideology, that's amazing. That's love, that's acceptance, that's compassion, that's understanding. Those are traits that we should embody. So would you say your father was military? Did you ever have a draw to go into the military? I mean, you got Vietnam veteran, which was an incredible, sacrifice for this country. Vietnam was rough on a lot of people. They didn't get enough praise when they came back. There was a lot of damage to come there. Did you ever feel yourself pulled towards the military route, or just when you were a young kid starting to figure life out? What did you think life had in store for you?
Well, those are two separate questions.
Well, yeah. I'm looking at it like, okay, I'm starting to understand the man that you were as a young kid. Yep. When you started to say, this is what I'm going to do in life, did you see military as a part of your route?
I didn't. And to this day, even looking back, right, that hindsight 2020 is, but I always felt compelled in that direction. Two of my grandfathers also are World War II veterans, one in the Pacific, one in Europe.
So you have a big lineage of military family.
We do. And so there was that inherent obligation that I felt inside as a very young man growing up, right, that you serve your country in one capacity or another. And I had a lineage of the men in our family who did not only serve in the military, but fought in wars. I did look very hard, even as I was graduating from high school, at a U.S. Army scholarship. That would have been a 4-year scholarship for college, and then ROTC for 4 years, then 4 years active duty, and then another 4 years in the reserve. So it was a 12-year commitment. And I actually made it pretty high towards the finals for the state of Michigan. And just had, like you do at 17 years old, a crisis of, do I want to do this? Because the other love I grew up with, I always had a fascination for our political history, for our founding fathers, right? That this country is really almost a unique miracle when you look at the history of governments throughout the centuries.
It absolutely is.
And got into, I was very, very, very lucky. I consider myself very blessed. So one of the interesting parts about my history growing up in California, to give you a little more context, is we lived in a small town in the San Fernando Valley called Canoga Park. And it was poor. It was the barrio. In second and third grade, I was basically the only kid that spoke English in my class. I went to school with a lot of children of Mexican descent, Venezuelan descent, Puerto Rican. My only saving grace was that I could play baseball and hang with these guys. So it was.
You earned your respect, your street cred.
That was my street cred, right? I was a small, skinny white kid surrounded in as true minority. I was a minority. And the Los Angeles Unified School District had a strange kind of gem in the rough program where starting at the end of third grade, they had this separate school that was 4th through 12th grade. It was called Sherman Oaks Center for Enriched Studies. And you could apply, but you had to take a test to get in. So it was purely based on academic merit. There was no tuition. And towards the end of third grade, I tested and got in. And it was one school was in Reseda, California. And the entire Los Angeles School District, if you get in the school, they would bus you to the school. My bus ride, generally an hour and a half each way. But we had some kids that were up at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning to get on a bus because traffic in LA, it could take 3 or 4 hours to get to this school. And so I get to this school, and it was a gifted magnet school, basically. And you were given every opportunity of whatever your mental capacity was to accelerate and to learn. And they had fantastic speech and debate programs. You could start taking AP classes in 9th or 10th grade, depending on your level. And so I got into the Lincoln Douglas debates, policy debate, all these things. So everybody has that teacher. My 9th grade honors English teacher, a man named Ray Schaefer, was also like the speech and debate coach, the drama coach, all of those things. And I just was inspired by him, got into the original Lincoln Douglas debates and the history of the U.S. government and all these things, and just was completely drawn to the founding fathers, to America. And so when it came to, and I apologize for the long answer to your question, when it came to deciding on the military route versus even through scholarships and academia versus the other things that I truly had a passion for, I ended up taking the other route. And decided, the same reason I'm asked why I sit on, and we'll get there. I guess I'm prelude this city council here for Brighton. It's a duty to serve. Our founding fathers always believed that if you benefit from this country, and you are blessed by its laws and its freedoms, that you have a duty to give back, utilizing though what your skill set is, right? So whether that is enlisting and joining the military, or being a fireman, or a policewoman, or even a politician, you give back to this community. And it wasn't a career politician thing. You stand up, you serve, and you give back, and then you go back to your private life. But that is how I've been aligned for a long time. So I made the choice of not going the military route, that I thought my best contribution to the community, as opposed to being a soldier, was to study the political science, the economics, the law, and be able to then utilize those academic gifts to give back to my community. So
what was your first job where you'd say you really started to get into that realm? So I see the vision that's being painted. When did you really start breaking into that realm? Did you have a couple careers before you got there? Let's just start to tell that part of the story. You graduate. Do you go straight into college after you graduate?
Yes. I actually, though I did my first year at Grand Rapids Community College.
Because you moved here for junior and senior year.
Yep. Interestingly, fate has a way of, interfering with plans. Less than 2 months after I moved here, my mom was a nurse at a rehab facility in Grand Rapids, got attacked by a brain injury patient, snapped her spine in several places, became disabled and handicapped 2 months of me moving here. And it was a tragedy for her, right? But you do what needs to be done. So I started working immediately while in high school, kind of paying the rent, supporting the family. So that first career, which almost spanned 15 years, all through the rest of high school, undergrad, and even law school, I worked in restaurants. So those who know me best know I'm an amateur chef. I absolutely love to cook. I love to host people. Food is my art. I'm horrible at drawing and painting and even stick figures, right? This is that know your strengths and weaknesses. But in a kitchen, I can paint in a pan. And so that was the first part of my initial career. And then so that first year for going off to Michigan was not in the cards at that time, where my family was and what my mom needed. But after that, I applied, got right in. I had taken my ACTs, I had done well in school, I was ready to go. And so went to Michigan for undergrad, did political science and economics there, and then law school at Wayne State Law School for my Juris Doctor. And I didn't really get the chance to start truly feeling like I was giving back to the community until after even my first law school career, after law school job, which I did a lot of work in the alternative risk transfer market. Think of medical malpractice insurance for hospitals. When I left that, I came back here to Brighton. I lived here, but I brought my career back because I was a road warrior. I traveled all the time. I was on planes sometimes, 12 legs in a week. And I opened up actually just down the street here a law office and started my own thing. But the first things I want to do was look for opportunities to really give back to the community. So I started volunteering and helping out with the Livingston County Veteran Treatment Court. What can I do there to help? I started basically volunteering to fill in at the Livingston County Juvenile Court, originally doing DL cases, which expanded delinquency cases, and then expanding into neglect and abuse, which is part of the same court. And I did that for several years. And essentially, eventually getting to what I gave the prelude before was when I had been approached by a few people that there was an opening on city council for the city of Brighton as well, which is where I lived, and put in for an appointment. And I didn't get the first one, but the second one was appointed to city council, and I've been serving there now for a little over 6 years. Just trying to bring whatever experience and education and what I have back to, lead and help out the community government. So anytime I get the opportunity to volunteer to help, it's what I love to do.
So the story makes a lot of sense for me. I see the young kid. He's got the diversity. He sees that you can make an impact on this world. He sees that we have something special here and that there's a duty to serve it. You get through law school. You know it in a textbook format at that point. Like you have the, knowledge, but you don't have the real world experience.
All the theory, none of the practice.
Exactly. You have theoretically what you need to go succeed in law, right? When you actually start getting into the legal system of the United States of America, was it what you expected? Are there things that shocked you? Was there, once you start actually putting yourself into the situation and you're the guy that is navigating these waters, just tell me some of the insights that you pulled at that period of your life. Because I feel like it's, if you learn how to work on a car from a textbook, you don't know how to work on a car until you actually get out there and then you solve the problems in the real world. What did you actually start to experience when you were first out there on your own, just from someone that's an outsider? I don't have any legal experience. What was it like from the transition of knowing how it should be and then experiencing the actual legal world?
Your question is a very good and insightful one, so compliments. I'll give you kind of two buckets as an answer. One, you're exactly right. But I find this in almost every profession, right? You can study in academia, whatever it is, but until you're out there in the real world, understanding the practical applications of what you're doing. And now simply, I'm general counsel for a software company out of New York now, and having to do lessons even for senior leadership and other people on the importance of what I call the and versus or. That sometimes even in a contract, it's not the big long words the lawyers put in, but it's simply deciding whether to put the word and or the word or in a certain spot can change outcomes. And in the corporate world, that usually means financial liability. But when I was volunteering in the juvenile court and some of the cases I've taken on pro bono over the years, this can affect people's liberty, right? This can affect when and how, if people can see their children in a custody battle. I mean, these are very real-world applications that I think the academic world, and I think it's a resource problem, but they don't really prepare you well to really, truly understand the impacts of what you're doing. I think that's why the State Bar of Michigan, when it comes to lawyers and everything else, pushed to do pro bono work for all lawyers, right? You could have the highest paying job and effectuate what you think are really big things. But, working in a juvenile court, working in a veteran treatment court, working in some of the clinics, for people who are homeless or don't have money, it goes to the second bucket there that there's an unfortunate reality that I think most people know. The cynical thing is that money buys justice in this country. And there's a few areas where that really isn't true, but there's a lot of areas. There's too many areas where it absolutely is. And it's a little bit heartbreaking. And even as a person who wants to give back, right, then I have to find myself balancing, well, I still need to make sufficient money to take care of my son and my wife and my family while also wanting to continue to give back. I think one of the things that we used to laugh at when I was in law school is everyone's looking for that great job coming out of law school. And there was always one posting that never came down on the wall. And it was full-time looking for a lawyer to do elder law, to help senior citizens. And the pay was $37,000 a year. And that job never came down. And it was the practical reality that you couldn't afford. I mean, I was lucky. I had very few and little student loans. I had a lot of scholarships and grants. And so I was very, very lucky. But even for the students who didn't, you're talking about a $250,000 education that you're going to make $37,000 a year. Well, it's the elderly people on that job post who really need justice and help, and lawyers can't afford to do it. So that's one of those practical things you find is that more often than not, justice does cost money, and it's just reality of the system.
To hear you say that out loud, I mean, that's what I see from the outside, but I'm not on the inside of the fight. But I mean, there's a certain amount of money that when you get past that point, you're almost excluded from a lot of things, or you can just have results consistently go your way that the average person would not. And that's super unfortunate because that undermines the entire word of justice. That undermines the entire trust in the system. And people see it, and we're more connected now than ever. Every court case is, you can look into them. And when you go, why was this person yielded this result and this person was given this? Well, look at the status difference between the two. That's incredibly unfortunate.
Well, and I want to make clear, though, too, that is, I don't want to convey that that's the norm, right, or the majority,
Sure.
but it does happen.
It exists.
Right, it exists. And I'm one of those, and I apologize, I don't remember, one of our founding fathers said that they'd rather see 100 convicted people go free than have one innocent person be in jail, right? It's that philosophical concept for me that it should be no person left behind. And unfortunately, while our justice system, I think, while imperfect, is still one of the best in the world, absolutely, there's always things that we could be working on, and this is one of them.
Maybe not our jailing system. Like if I've been to other countries, let me think of, like Finland, they can't even keep people in prison because the entire point of prison over there is to rehabilitate the people, to get them back into society and to help turn their lives around and make them contributing members again. And I remember when I was having a tour through one of the cities, I think it was Kuopio, they were explaining this to me and I was fascinated because it's a for-profit system in most of America. I mean, jails are privately owned. They're businesses. Like, hey, John, you want to buy a jail? Let's see if we can get some people in this area to go to prison. Maybe we can get the judge to convict a couple more people. I mean, it's unfortunate. That's a terrible system. Now, if you're a murderer or a rapist or like the lowest caliber of human being, I am perfectly fine with you sitting in a cell for whatever period we deem appropriate. But if you're like a minor offense on something and you're, because of your status or something else, you're now going to sit in a cell and we're not trying to just like get you back on track, that's a system that we need to work on. Right. What are your feelings on something like that? It was, looking at a country like Finland where they're just trying to rehabilitate people and put resource into people that need help. A lot of people that have fallen to drugs, that their lives have fallen to shambles, that they're, those are clearly the people that are going to have run-ins with the law very frequently. They need guidance. They need a little bit of a boost when they're at the bottom. Sometimes they have no family, no friends, nothing, and we tend to just, oh, you're in trouble? All right, we're going to stay away from you. I've worked with the Livingston County Juvenile Court for years with these kids. I can almost always look at their support system in their life and go, makes sense to me. The parents are like, whoa, we have no idea why this kid is making all these bad decisions. And I'm like, I've got a couple suggestions why. What are your opinions on something like that?
So I'll start with the latter part first. Is in all the cases that I volunteered on, or worked on for the county, for the juvenile court, only one did I find that I truly believed it was a stable home environment. Only one.
Exactly.
So I do absolutely agree with you on that point. The other interesting thing, why hope is such a rare commodity, I feel like, in our society today, right? But this is one of the areas that I have hope is one of the largest difference between the juvenile justice system and the adult justice system is that there's a pervasive underlying philosophical belief in the juvenile system in rehabilitation, that children make mistakes, and the
Is it tied into like the innocence of a child, knowing that like, man, you know what, you can make mistakes, you can be wrong, but that doesn't condemn you for life. You can be better, you can become better. Do you think it's tied to that?
I think slightly, right? I don't think as much as, right, because in juvenile law, there is a certain age, and I believe, and don't hold my feet to the fire, but it's around like 7 years old where we even say legally that a child under that can't even form the concept of intent, right? So even if it's an assault and battery or, or something else, that we say that we can't even try that child because of the innocence concept, right? Their brains don't even can inform intent. But after that age, our prosecutor's office can charge a child, can prove intent, but up to, and Michigan just changed this, basically up to the age of 18 years old, you're still considered a juvenile. Well, we're told, we being the entire juvenile justice system, whether it's magistrates, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, that the key, the theme, and the purpose is still to rehabilitate these children. I think to answer your point from a different perspective is, I'm not sure why exactly that ends at 17 or 18. Right? Why we have always been a nation of second chances, the great comebacks, and I don't believe in this binary approach that, well, when you become 18, we have to write you off. And it's difficult for me from a corporate perspective because I have to do state compliance everywhere, right? So I was examining New York State Correction Law 752, which basically says you cannot discriminate anymore against someone solely based on a criminal record unless you meet these certain exceptions for the type of job, right? That you have to give people a second chance. And realize I'm an econ guy too, right? Economics is a huge thing. I'm a huge capitalist. It doesn't make financial sense to automatically exclude an entire subset of people without examining their skills or their rehabilitation or whatever it is, because you could hurt your profits, right? I always look to things like the Olympics and the military as the beacons of a better set of philosophies when it comes to things like who do we exclude? Because the military and the Olympics, they don't care what your background is. I mean, with limited exception, they do, right? But they don't care about race. They don't care about religion. They don't care about any of those things. They want to make the best team they can.
It's more about competency.
Right, and it's about being the best, putting together the best team, the champions, right? The best military on the field, the best gymnastics team in an event, whatever it is. And I think we do ourselves economically. I think we do ourselves ethically and morally disservice as a country when we say, well, every single person who's ever had a criminal record is now somehow deserving of a scarlet letter and shouldn't be welcomed back in the fold. Now, I don't believe in this binary concept, though, that all of them should be welcomed back, right? That's one of the problems we get into these discussions of, well, it's all or nothing. And I say, no. I think there are people that should be locked up forever, that should never get out. I am one of the people, right or wrong, it's a personal opinion. I think several of the sex offenders that are out there for the serious stuff, I don't believe they can be rehabilitated. And it's because of reading medical studies and data and talking to the psychiatrists, the psychologists. I think there's certain people there that I think there's a wiring problem in their head that you cannot fix, and they should never be let out. But there was an old urban myth that even the State Bar of Michigan, though, licensed a convicted former murderer, right? That did their time and went through the legal education, and we go through what's called a character and fitness exam. Has nothing to do whether you pass the bar and the test. Do you have the moral fitness, the ethical character to own what you've done, to be honest, to fully disclose those things? And the state bar takes it very seriously. But there's that embedded concept that you can earn your way back. It's not an automatic disqualifier. So it's a long answer to your question, but I think our justice system could use a little longer time frame than just stopping it at 17 or 18 and say, look, there are mixed within some of these career criminals. There's some really good people who made some bad choices or were down on their luck. and we could benefit from bringing them back into the fold.
I think you made some tremendous points during that. And I think you are absolutely right in the fact that, one person that commits a crime could be so vastly different than another person that committed the exact same crime. They could be vastly different. They could view it differently. They could have, they could have had a revelation. They could have come to they can be so different as people. To blanket those people as, well, you both did the same thing and then treat them accordingly, that makes no logical sense. As a capitalist, I would think that you would also believe, though, that a business owner has the right to hire the people that he chooses to do. So, like, if you were running a business and me and you were our own business owners, you run a law practice, I run this academy, and I'm not going to hire anyone that has a murder charge, regardless of whether they had served their time or not. Do you believe that I should have the right to refuse based on that?
Yes.
Exactly. So it's like I have that choice, but we should look for gray areas. I love how you've said that. We're like, it shouldn't be this binary thing, this black and this white, the gray area, right? Like we should be, there's a little shout out.
Well done.
We should be able to look in that center point and treat people as individuals. And I think the more often we look at someone as an individual and we don't look at other labels that they may or may not fit, that right there is already a key to success. That goes all the way back to the very beginning of your story where you talked about the melting pot. You talked about the beauty in this nation. You see the individual. There are good people of almost any label you could attach, and there are also bad people of almost every label you can attach.
Correct.
That's why you look at the individual. So one thing that keeps playing in my head over and over that I have to ask you about is the and/or part. I can't let that go yet. Because when I heard that, I'm going like, and is attaching two concepts together. And both terms need to be and both terms, okay? Or is a separate thing. Is it more difficult than that, or is it people just don't realize how crucial that is when they read the document? Or is there some underlying hidden language that's written in that? Because how is it more difficult than that? But obviously that's crucial. Help me understand that and/or problem, because you said in the corporate world it exists.
Yeah, so it's highly crucial, right? In my world, which I do a ton of contract work, right? We call them condition precedents, right? So the analogy is say, I will give you $1 million if you mow my lawn or paint my house.
If I do either, I'm receiving $1 million.
Right. There's your or if I say I'll give you $1 million if you mow my lawn and paint my house.
I have to fulfill both conditions.
You have to do both conditions. So it's a very simplified sense, right? But now when you're talking about to earn $1 million or to be able to fly to the moon or whatever that thing is, that goal that you're trying to attain, in something as simple as contract language. I know we were speaking before. One of the things I think most important for young people to listen to is how do you read a commercial or a residential lease, right? Your first apartment, your first dorm room, right? We were talking about this, and if kids don't understand, or people in general don't understand the importance of reading and those words, right? In order to get your security deposit back on your first apartment, you have to clean the apartment or repair, right? Everything. Versus and, right? It has very practical, real-world implications that sometimes when we read documents, we just blaze over those words like they're nothing, right? Oh, I'm just going to read the big ones and get the highlights. Where's the Cliff Note version of the book, right? But I think all too often in my world, right, when we talked about the legal system and the concept of justice, I've been on... I took a case several years ago pro bono to help a veteran who had sunk almost his entire retirement into buying a large, like an RV, and end up having problems with it. And, if we found out that the lemon laws that apply to cars don't really apply to RVs. In the one sense, you almost would want to bring like an automobile type case to it, but they say, well, it's not really an automobile. It's more like a living quarters. And then you're like, okay, well, then property law. Well, it's not really a living quarters. It's more like an automobile. And you're like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And all I know is I had a veteran who sunk hundreds of thousands of dollars into this and couldn't use it, right? I mean, it broke my heart. And at the end of the day, when it all came down to it in the case at the end, we had a federal judge who sat there and said, well, it was the and versus or. Did you sign the contract? And he had nothing to say but yes. And it didn't matter whether he read it, whether he understood it, whether there were pages missing from
By
it.
signing it, you're acknowledging everything on that piece of paper.
Yeah. So the and versus or, you can boil it down to the simplest of examples, but something like that does become crucial when it comes to your money or your children or your rights or anything else. And so.
And I think comprehension on what you're reading, because if you don't understand every word and you don't make it a point to ask, that one word could like completely change what that contract means. So first of all, having a strong vocabulary, understanding semantics of words, exactly what is inferred, meant, whatever it is, because that lawyer is going to take all feeling out, everything like that, or that judge, and they're going to go black and white as much as humanly possible. These are the terms and conditions. Is your name on that paper? Well, then that means you acknowledged all of these things. And if you had a dispute, it would have been scratched beforehand or adjusted, right? We would have altered that piece of paper. I think if people could just understand the conversation we're having right now, and they made it a point to say, okay, this is crucial. It might not be affecting me right now. That's why I'm just blowing through the signature. But when I go to get out of this situation, whatever I signed is going to be the chains that I have to unlock, right? Would you say that's a proper analogy?
Yeah, actually, and I'll take it a step further, right? Lawyers classically, and I love this, right? I try to never take myself too seriously. We're one of the last groups that you can still make every joke about on the planet, right? Nobody's going to care.
I hate to say it, but when you were talking about the one part where it's like our character is monitored so much where like we have to go in front of a board and you have to get approved to be fit. I'm like, there are a lot of lawyers that absolutely do not give a shit about justice, that is just about winning case, and it doesn't matter. You try to find any loophole. And I'm thinking to myself, like, there's a board. Those people are failing. Right? Because that is a common thing. I'm sure you've seen lawyers in practice that don't really care about right from wrong. They're just trying to present a case to win the case.
And full, I call it radical transparency. Quite often, I'm one of them, right?
Your objective is win the case for your client.
Yeah, depending on what hat I have. You know, if I put on my juvenile or volunteer hat and those things, yes, I'm very, very justice. But for my business clients, I'm paid to win. And I have a pretty darn good track record. I am exacting. I say these things like the and versus or debate to educate people that these things are important. But know this, like in every other academic discipline, you're going to have A law students and you're going to have C law students. Okay, even the student who gets straight C's across the board and can pass the bar exam still is a lawyer. There's a competitiveness within lawyers themselves. And so, yes, those things are absolutely true, and I'll own that. Yeah, there are times that I do love to win. I'm highly competitive. Grew up on sports, and my simple thing with all of it, I guess philosophically, as I've always said, I actually don't care what the rules of the game are. You pick the rules. I'll win a trophy within them. And I think that's my overall philosophical approach to whether or not it's volunteering, whether or not it's, multi-million-dollar contracts at the corporate level.
This is going to be a deep question, and you don't have to answer it. But when you choose to have a mindset like that, which I think most people would, because at the end of the day, like you said, I am paid to win, right? I mean, that is why you're employed. That's why you're being hired. They're not hiring you to stand on your moral virtue and do what is objectively right and tell your client, like from the movie Liar, Liar, like, stop breaking the law.
One of my favorites.
One of the best scenes ever, right? I mean, but with that being said, for every person that chooses to go on that type of battlefield and bend things and persuade people and get the judge to rule in a way that probably isn't right, but you found just the right loophole to win, or you found the perfect presentation, it starts to undermine the entire system. That's the same as teaching a child that, like, stealing's wrong, but if you can take it from the store and they don't really notice and they don't keep inventory and they don't check on you, and then you can get that thing, well, maybe then you go ahead and you're the one that gets to walk out with that toy. You're undermining the entire system of which we all depend on. How do you feel about it from that perspective?
I'm going to challenge you in your assumptions on that, right? It starts to sound like that binary code thing, right? Where it's either all justice or none of it, right? But to give you the shout out, right? There's a lot of gray area in the law, right? And there's a system for the institution set up, rather, even if you're going to go the full litigation route, right? Of you start at the trial court level and that judge or that jury rules a certain way. Well, and if you have problems in the legal basis for that decision, you take it to the appellate court, right? Or you take it to the Supreme Court. At the end of the day, and so there are checks and balances, right, on whether something was an egregiously wrongly decided, verdict. versus whether two judges could look at the exact same set of facts and the exact same circumstances, come to different outcomes. And there's a system to check that going up. But I also even outside, let's say you hypothetically run it all the way up the system and you don't like how any of them rule. Well, at the end of the day, the judge's job is to interpret and apply the law, not to make it.
100%.
Right? And so this is why I tell people elections are important. And I'll say it to anybody looking at it, please go vote. I don't care how you vote. Just go vote, right? And I find that even a lot of people get very, very heated about the presidential election, and I say it's a matter of constituent dilution, right? The president of the United States has, 350 million constituents. You're a drop in the bucket, but your local city council, a lot smaller, right? I mean, Brighton, barely 8,000 people, right? So, and these are the people who usually can dictate, can you build a shed in your backyard? Right? Can you add on a garage to your house? Do you have to shovel your sidewalks in the wintertime? These are things that affect you, materially, right, in your home and how you run your house. So I say get involved in that only because at the end of the day as well, if you don't like the legal outcome utilizing the system that's in place, well, then the legislature can change those laws. Like I say, you pick the rules. And my job is to win a trophy within them. If we don't like the rules of the game, then collectively as a community, we can change those rules to provide that justice. And we've watched that evolution, right? America wasn't perfect when it was founded back then. And we've watched over time, even with our U.S. Constitution, evolve. And we've changed the rules to better for justice, right? Women the right to vote. The 14th Amendment, the 13th Amendment. We have all kinds of amendments over time. And even some of the amendments we've passed and then gotten rid of. Prohibition, a perfect example. We like alcohol. We don't like alcohol. We like alcohol again. We can make those decisions as a community, as a nation, to make us a more evolving and just society. So.
When you see the current state of this nation with the executive powers as they are and the decisions that are being made, like things are pretty polarized, they're pretty split apart. You have even executive branches fighting with judicial branches. You have, we just had the Dobbs decision. We have a lot of turmoil going on. How do you assess the situation? Do you think there's any major flaws that are going on in the current situation, or do you just think it's two parties that are working towards different objectives that are getting further and further apart from each other? Because I feel like our civil discourse used to happen in a smaller place. Like it'd be like, let's say you had right and left. You had a kind of smaller area where we would negotiate, hey, we should do a little more of this, or we should do a little more of this. Now it feels like, from an outside perspective, things have gotten so far that you have one side pushing for a completely separate nation and then from the other side, right? What do you think the current state of affairs are going, from where we are right now? As a man that, like you've mentioned multiple times, you're a capitalist. You see the melting pot of the nation. You understand the importance of the Constitution, the amendments that we have, the pursuit of a more perfect union that we're seeking. What are the state of affairs in your eyes?
First, I think political discourse is good, right? Starting at that 50,000-foot level. I think, and I even say this locally on the Brighton City Council, there's 7 of us. If all 7 of us thought the same, you don't need 7 of us, right? You want that melting pot, that diversity of opinion and viewpoints. I think the only thing that absolutely truly disturbs me, right, is when it devolves into physical violence. That can't happen. A lot of people either want to tiptoe around it. I'm not a tiptoeer, right? I'm very transparent. I think what happened on January 6th is inexcusable. And I'm not going to pass judgment on who was involved, who caused it, whatever, but I don't care what political party you're from. I don't care what your personal beliefs are. If your personal beliefs lead you to get into a physical altercation with our police officers, I don't care what level, what jurisdiction, wherever they are, you've gone too far. That is unacceptable. I think short of that, you can find it in our own political history, right, of screaming matches between congressmen. I love even the UK history, right, or even Great Britain themselves, right, the House of Lords versus the House of Commons. House of Commons, every debate is almost a screaming match there, right? It's more of a cultural thing, but they're having the discourse. I think we are very divided right now. I think there's other reasons for it than just because of politics. I think it comes from a different place. for us as a nation, which are more problematic. I think politics are more of a symptom of the problem. But I don't. I think the U.S. history is full of times that maybe the historical documents have kind of diluted how intense those debates were. Now, this is not to say I'm ignoring the fact that at one point it did boil over into physical violence. We ended up in the U.S. Civil War.
The Civil War.
One of the bloodiest, deadliest conflicts America has ever been in. But I think that's where I start. Where I started with my point is it can't ever get to physical violence. We've gone down that road as a nation, and it was atrocious and it was horrible, and we lost a lot of great men and also women during that war. I don't know exactly where the line is. I know that we really, as a nation, can't afford to get there again. So if people engaged in these debates are starting to feel those type of emotions, then it's time to take a deep breath, de-escalate the situation, and see where we can find common ground. I think that's...
When you look at January 6th, besides people that were in physical altercations, because we have laws for that, is it not just the First Amendment rights to meet, assemble, address for your grievances? Governor Whitmer took a whole group of people during her campaign leading up to governor to the state capitol in protest at the state capitol. So on a state level, it's the identical incident. It's the First Amendment. We're supposed to... If me and you and a mass group of people have concerns, the First Amendment says not only do you have the freedom of speech, you have the right to assemble, and you have the right to address the government for those grievances. What makes someone, how could we classify a group of people as insurrectionists versus individuals? Were there any deaths on January 6th?
Yes.
There were?
I believe there was one actually one of the...
Well, I mean, Ashley Bobbitt, she got shot, but
yeah.
I remember that.
And then I think there were... Although somewhere I don't hold my feet to the fire, right? One of the, I believe one of the police officers had a heart attack. Another one committed suicide shortly thereafter. But I don't think they ever could tie the but-for causation directly to.
That is not an insurrection. You ever study American history or any history ever? An insurrection is, you know that.
Right.
An insurrection is a bloody, terrible... How are people an insurrectionist if they attended January 6th by being there? As I've stated over and over, it's just your First Amendment right to assemble with a group of people that want to take a stance on something. So
you kind of have two concepts there. So let me see if I can unpack them. One is the freedom of speech issue, right? And I'm going to give you the
yeah, you don't incite violence, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, the unfortunate lawyer answer, right? The First Amendment is not absolute. And I'm not saying that because I didn't pick the rules on this, right? You have 200 years of jurisprudence that have said, classically people know the example.
Bomb on an airplane,
right,
fire,
you can't scream fire in a crowded
yeah.
theater. And I'm not passing any judgment as to exactly where that line is, right? I don't want to get into that part of it, but know that, number one, it's not absolute. But I'm a big proponent of political discourse, of free speech, of the right to assemble. Where I separate them out into two different things is standing outside the Capitol and saying, whatever these, utilizing your free speech rights, your right to assembly, I'm absolutely all for it. Translating that to, I'm going to exercise my right to assemble by going into a secure area where I'm not allowed to be, that really isn't the right to assemble. I don't have the right to assemble in the mess hall of a maximum security prison. I don't have the right to assemble in the middle of the Pentagon.
Did people storm the Capitol, or were the gates opened up? And I saw a video of people in a wheelchair being rolled through the Capitol. Did he storm the Capitol? Is that if I'm a police group or I'm leadership there and I choose to open a barricade to keep things from getting violent, let's say that was my suspicion. Let's say me and you are there and we walk into a barricade that was opened up by the authorities. Are we now insurrectionists?
I don't, to be honest, it's a tough question. I understand where you're coming with the question. I'm not sure. I think whenever you autopsy any incident, any matter, whatever it is, could be the classic example we know in law school is you could take 16 people, put 4 on each corner, and stage an auto accident right in front of all of them. And you'll get 16 different versions of what happened, who caused it, who's at fault. I think there's a little bit of that going on here, right? Because I've heard the reports, and I have not individually confirmed anyone. I've heard the reports that, yes, at some points, barricades were open and people were allowed in by police officers.
Yeah, I saw that on video.
Yeah, and there's other reports where other police officers, some from either the same actual unit or other law enforcement officials, were barricading doors trying to keep people out. So I don't know. Is the one not an insurrection? The other's an insurrection? I don't know.
The only reason I asked is because the way you had presented this initially
Sure.
was very, you have gone too far, there was an insurrection, this was a thing. Whereas when I look at that event, I see it very differently. There may have been people there during the BLM protests. I watched a police
Sure.
in Minneapolis, was it? Police station in Minneapolis was burned to the ground.
Correct.
Burned to the ground. Those people weren't charged.
Correct.
They weren't even considered to be. They were just expressing frustration with the system. Burning a police station to the ground, John, was viewed as culturally acceptable.
Oh, see, not to me.
Not to me either.
Not to me.
But to the mass media and to countless people. And another woman that I had on this podcast 6 episodes ago, she said, no, they shouldn't be charged with anything. They were very frustrated, and they're just trying to get their voices heard.
No, I absolutely don't agree, right?
100%.
And it goes, I think, back to that. It's the two things. It's the melting pot approach, right? Of everyone can have different opinions and who they are. But it's also that concept of the love of this country, the love of the Constitution, and the love of the rules. Okay?
Sure.
I
Arson is against the rules.
Yes, right?
Yes. Physical violence is against the rules.
So as much as I welcome everyone into the fold, right, in a non-discriminatory basis because of what they can add to it, I also apply the rules in a non-discriminatory basis when you break the law. I don't care what gender or color or socioeconomic background you come from. If you burn down someone's building, and I don't care if it's a private enterprise, if it's a police station, whatever it is, people need to be held accountable. And when we start to selectively, as a country, hold one person accountable and one other, right? One of my favorite books to go back to is Dr. Seuss's Star-Bellied Sneetches, right? Mm-hmm. This person gets treated differently from this person for whatever arbitrary reason. Not only do you undermine the concept of justice, you undermine the institutions that stand for it.
1,000%. And like I said, the only reason I dove into this is, if we're just in the crowd on January 6th, frustrated at our First Amendment rights, that does not make us the same as someone that may or may not have attacked a police officer or anything like that. You are individuals there for a purpose. The presentation, and maybe I perceived you incorrectly, I'll have to go back and listen to it.
That's okay.
Was that like everybody that did that, you were out of line and incorrect. I view it exactly like you. I don't care what race you are, social status you are, things like that. If we have a set system, and you were breaking that system, you should be held accountable accordingly based on what you did within that system. Just because you were at the same location, that doesn't, in my mind, translate in any way. And this is going on majorly because one of the, I believe, candidates for governor was disqualified in the Michigan election because he was at the January 6th insurrection. Ryan Kelly.
Is that why he was disqualified, or was he one of the ones that got caught up in the petitions?
No, there was multiple thrown out for incorrect.
Yeah, I didn't know who was who.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 5 people were shut down for being governor, but one of them was just because he attended January 6th. That's a slippery slope.
I find it almost ironic, right? That if you just almost swap the identities that people are using, right? You see very, very similar facts on both sides, right? Take the January 6th day and take some of the Black Lives Matter protests, right? In both of those, you have a sizable population of people who are operating peacefully, who are utilizing their freedom of speech rights and the right to assemble. And then what I believe, or at least in the limited particular individual knowledge, that in both groups you have a small subset of people who raise the issue to physical violence, potential criminal activity, and yet the whole group gets lumped in with those.
As either acceptable or unacceptable.
Right. This is that binary code thing, right? Either you're in for a penny, in for a pound. You're all in together. You're all now guilty by association. And I don't know if it's because it makes it easier for us to just put people in group and classify them and say, well, you're all the same person.
Yeah.
because
That's also racism. That's also stereotyping. That's all cops are bastards. That's also
Right.
all this or anything.
Right.
100%. I view it exactly like you. And I'm
Yeah.
glad to see as we've worked through this,
Yeah.
I view it the exact same way.
Yeah.
Like if you're a part of this does not make you
No.
as guilty as the people
No.
doing extreme things, no matter which circumstance, no matter what. The BLM is the left more version and the January 6th is the right version, but it's
Correct.
the same type of idea. And
Yeah.
you see it the way that I see it.
And I also want, if the extremists on the Black Lives Matter protests and the extremists on the January 6th matter conduct the same, if both people assault a police officer, they should both
Be held
charged,
accountable.
Both be held accountable equally, same laws apply. That's the equality in that, right? It is a measure of justice that I think we actually should be judging our stuff by. But if there's 200 people on both sides, that's why I also say each one should have their own lawyer. Each one has a different set of facts that a judge needs. You can't group people like this together and charge them all and even accuse them all of the exact same thing.
100%. I mean, group identity is so incredibly threatening to a healthy society because, like I said, in every example, racism, stereotyping, it goes all the way back to tribalism. If
Yes.
you view any group of people as separate from you, look at the Holocaust, okay? Once you say, oh, you meet this one label, then we're going to put you in this group.
Right.
And anyone that's in this group, it doesn't matter what type of individual you are going to be treated the way that we would like to treat this group. That is damaging. And good people that want to do the right thing need to get back to, we need to get out of this group identity talk. We need to get back to individuals, and we need to, the label of you being a Republican or a Democrat, I don't care.
Right.
It is way down here for me. I care about your integrity level. I care about your honesty. I care about this. There are so many things that I care about before where you align politically. It's not even funny, right? So I've been trying to spread that message, and it's cool that as we've worked through this, you view it through the same lens as a lawyer, that like, no, just because you are one thing does not equate you to be, it's and or, okay?
Right.
It's not like, oh, if you were at January 6th, that means this. You
Right.
and are always that. No.
Correct.
It's an or statement. That's a good way to break that down. So a perfect segue from what we're talking about right now is you were the lone vote, which the way that the universe has laid this out, I can't believe it. My last guest had said, hey, on Brighton City Council, we had a vote for a proposal to bring marijuana dispensaries into Brighton, which the city council had struck down previously. Then it came back up, and then it was voted upon again, and then it was unanimous the first time. No, not. It was struck down, but now this time it was 6-1. I'm sitting with the one, the defector, the gentleman that said this is not accurate. That's a perfect thing because you are in service to your city, which you've believed was a civil duty since you were young. You obviously have a strong reason for taking an opinion that is against the other 6 city council members, because I'm sure you've been there for 6 years. You guys live in this. You live here in Brighton, obviously?
Yeah, you have to live in the city.
To be on city council. So you live here in Brighton. This is your community. You're based out of here. I'd just love to hear your opinion on that, why you voted that way, and, just speak on that as much as you'd like.
Happy to. I have to give you a little bit of background so you understand what going into it and why I voted the way I did. So take you back, 2018 is when the state of Michigan voted to basically decriminalize marijuana in the state, right, for recreational use. Immediately after that election, it was very, very unclear of what was going to happen now in your local community. What does this mean? Where are we going to go? There were no regulations in place. There was no licensing body yet in place. There was nothing. And so on a very short time frame as a community, you had to vote to either just allow everything as a free-for-all, or you could vote under the newly passed legislation that you could opt out to licensing anything or allowing it into the community. I believe we did that immediately as a council back then, and I think it was unanimous. And I was wholly on board, right? Because I don't know what the rules of the game are.
So you
right?
can't just openly vote for a game that you have no idea what you're saying yes to.
It's not going to be a free-for-all in my community. I'm never going to allow that. Now, since that time, over the next year or so, they developed, the MRA, the Michigan Regulatory Agency. It looks a lot, very, very, very similar. A lot of the parallels was drawn from the MLCC, who regulates alcohol. So they established a lot of different types of licenses. They established all these rules for each of the licenses. All these laws and regulations got put in place. After that started, I look at the marijuana industry as that. It's an industry. And it's been proven true that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, but there are several parts to it, and this is leading up to why I voted the way I did. The two basic buckets, if you just categorize them as retail sales, which were known under the medical marijuana laws as dispensaries. They're now codified as basically like provisioning centers, but retail sales. And then there's the commercial industrial side, which, your retail sales is, I think it's less than 20% of all the licenses that are available, right? So you're talking everywhere from people familiar with growers, but there's also testing labs, which have been around since medical marijuana. We've had them for almost 15 years in the state of Michigan. Testing labs are the ones that, it comes from the growers. They're going to test it. What pesticides were used? What's the marijuana content, right? Is there anything dangerous in this? The same as they've done it from the medical side for forever. There's an entire process that goes on from growers to then a transporter is another license. The testing labs, there's processors who then take the marijuana that's been tested and certified, and whether or not they leave it in, I guess, flour, or they make it into the gummies and the edibles, and then eventually gets to the stores. Well, all these are separate licenses. Only one of them, really, for the dispensaries has retail sales. So over the last 4 years, after the regulations got put in place, I started at least raising the question, and openly so, right? Is this an industry that we want to consider for the city of Brighton? And doing so that I don't know the answer, right? Starting from the concept of I don't know, let's at least explore this. And realizing that there's different licenses and everything else. And I have said it today, I'm almost indifferent. I'm still on the fence to whether or not we should have provisioning centers within the city of Brighton. But I absolutely am all for us as a city examining the commercial and industrial part of the industry. Right? There are no sales there. This is the footprint for a testing lab is smaller than your gym. And I always want to say, look, the answer at the end of the day after the inquiry can still be no. But at least let's explore it. Let's make an educated decision. Because if we don't, and I've been saying this for years, we risk a ballot initiative. And the difference, the way it works with the ballot initiative is if any municipality, Brighton or otherwise, you could create your own zoning ordinance and you could write, how far they have to be from schools. The state default is 1,000 feet. But MRTMA, which is the state statute on this, says any municipality can reduce that to whatever they want, which I wasn't in favor of. So bringing it up, we opted out initially. We finally got enough council members to start having that conversation, especially because that's what happened in Pinckney. Pinckney said, the same as their municipal leader said, our voters will never go for this. And the ballot initiative came in, they're like, we're not worried about it. And guess what? It passed. Well, we can break down the votes in the city of Brighton as well from every election. You can look them up through the county website. You can go back to the 2018 vote, and you can see that collectively all four precincts basically voted yes in 2018. Excluding one of the precincts, some of those votes were approaching 60% of our population. Despite what people will tell you what everybody else thinks, the numbers don't lie, right? This is the data. This is how people, when they get into the voting booth, this is what them voting what they believe. And I've always believed there's a disconnect there as well. So we started, and myself and who is now Mayor Pro Tem Bone, got collective support, and we sent a charge back to our planning commission to say, look, we're not saying we're going to do this, but what we'd love to see is send us a draft ordinance of what it would look like. And here's the stuff we want. And I specifically asked for this in the motion. I want to see 1,000 feet from every school. I also want to see 500 feet from the downtown business district, because I don't believe that even if the citizens wanted to consider a provisioning center for Brighton, it should go on Main Street. But I also don't think a business like a Chick-fil-A or an In-N-Out Burger should go on Main Street either. The traffic and the parking problems are already a very difficult task for us as a city. I said, but at least consider that and the commercial and industrial. So that's the background to where we get to a meeting we held earlier this year, where a meeting was organized to, I don't know, my interpretation personally was to measure our appetite for revisiting the opt-out vote shortly after the 2018 election, right? Are we going to stay opt-out, or should we consider this as a way that council could control it as opposed to a ballot initiative? So we held a meeting, which, I don't know, I think it was 6 or 7 hours of a ton of public comment and everybody else. And as soon as they got done, without any debate, one of the council members makes a motion to basically reaffirm our opt-out status. And I required debate on the motion. I think you should have, if the public comes to speak for 4 to 6 hours, we should probably have a debate, at least acknowledging what they've said. And I simply said there, I said, my problem with this is we have grouped everything into one vote. I said, I at least want to have the conversation about commercial or industrial applications, because from a reality standpoint, Brighton sits at 23 and 96. We are at the crossroads of the 4 largest marijuana industry jurisdictions in the state of Michigan, being Flint, Ann Arbor, Lansing, and Detroit. I said, I'm happy to set provisioning centers aside, but let's at least talk about commercial industrial. I'm not for just blanketly taking the ostrich approach and burying our heads in the sand. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. I said, and no one other thing, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. When the public, several members of the public stood up and talked about heartbreaking real-world stories of the effect of marijuana on high school students and our youth, I heard them loud and clear. But I also turned to them and said, know that all these stories, the anecdotal pieces, right, the heartfelt conveyances of these tragedies has occurred under a system of absolute prohibition. And the one thing my grandma always used to say growing up, that if you do the same thing over and over expecting a different result, you're going to become insane. I said, and
that's the definition of insanity.
The definition, right? So my position is this. I just want to make the best, most educated decisions I can for the community, for my own family, for my son, for my wife, for my friends, for my family. And in order to make an educated decision, you actually have to go through the educational aspect. You have to explore. I went and to understand these, I with different very members of either council or the city staff, I toured a couple provisioning centers, a testing lab, a grow facility. I didn't know much about them. Started to learn the difference between the warehouse grow operation versus the greenhouse ones, and even things like the difference on odor in the community and security and learning all these things. And I learned a lot. And so the reason I voted no on that motion was, one, it had no legal effect. I voted on a motion to reaffirm a legislative action we've already taken. One, didn't make any sense to me. Two, I also voted no because it was an approach by the council to so say we're going to continue to bury our heads in the sand. We're not even going to examine the industrial or commercial applications. And like I said, I'm split on the provisioning centers. Unfortunately, now we're in a situation where there is a ballot initiative, has been certified. I think there's challenges to that ordinance that are going to present itself at the city of Brighton. I think no matter what happens, we're going to get sued either way. I think we missed an opportunity as council to be able to kind of get out in front of this thing and do right according to what we've seen as the historical votes of our citizens. But now we've left it in the hands of whoever drafted that ordinance and what our citizens want to do with it. So, yes, I voted no on the motion to reaffirm our opt-out status. And I've got, you're a politician, right? So I don't know, a lot of people know when you run and you become elected in office, actually the legal protections decrease for you, right? So you don't have the same standards for slander and defamation and libel and all those things. You got to have thick skin, right? And I've been now accused of being the pot-smoking councilman, that I want to spend, provisioning centers on Main Street, and literally just because.
And all these are not true.
No, they're not true. But you have thick skin. When you run for politics, you're going to put yourself out there. If you want to be a leader, you have to be able to lead, not only when it's easy, but I find the greater challenge is when it's hard, when it's difficult. That to me is the integrity of true leadership. So.
That makes sense, and I'm glad you laid out your perspective on that. And I've seen some of the people, like I have friends that use and I have friends that don't use, and anecdotally I've witnessed people, because there was a huge push for like the medicinal side of marijuana and all the benefits and like the counter propaganda work, right? Like for a long period of time from the US government down, propaganda was pushed out against marijuana. And I witnessed almost like a pendulum effect, right? When things are extreme one way, they tend to go extreme the other way. And we say a lot of things like, well, it's not addictive, it's this, it's not as harmful as alcohol. There are psychological effects, and there are, anecdotally from my experience, I've witnessed countless people where if your fulfillment and endorphins and positive energy can come from sitting at home, eating Cheetos and smoking marijuana, you are going to change your brain's reward system for you. Why are you going to go through this incredibly difficult process of finding fulfillment in your life and all of these things if you can just subsidize that with like, hey, I can just light this and feel good and I don't really have to do anything? We have to look at, is that what you want for your children? Is that what you want for your community? Is that what, now I understand what you're saying, where you're saying like, listen, I'm not saying whether we should be pro or really against marijuana. I'm saying we need to look at what are the impacts of allowing provisioning centers in our community. I'm against having it downtown. Mm-hmm. But the scary thing is when you have a ballot initiative, which is what's happened here. First of all, I believe, and this was from Ken's testimony on this podcast, basically, we'll call it that, where he was laying out to me that most of the people pushing for this marijuana aren't even from Brighton. They don't live here in the city. These are outside groups, people that own maybe the greenhouse that has, that's the main dispensary around here that people know about. It's got like 1,800 customers a day. Imagine trying to put that downtown. These are people that are pushing for Brighton to approve dispensaries downtown. First of all, if you're not a constituent of Brighton, why am I really taking your voice into consideration is a question that I guess I would have for you. I would be concerned about what our residents want. And if we survey and poll them and it's clear that they do want something, then we may have to bend to, okay, this is the desires of the people. Have they been educated correctly? Do they understand repercussions of this? Are they looking at it from a proper perspective? And if those things are true, well, then that is what the people want, right? But how is it that we can take in, would you agree with what he had said that most of the people pushing to get the dispensaries downtown or the group that started the ballot initiative, they're not even from the city of Brighton? Is that accurate?
I would disagree with that.
They're not. The group that put together the ballot is not from Brighton.
No, because you put two things in there.
Let's start with just that.
Okay, I have my suspicions as to who brought the ballot initiative, and I do not believe they are a Brighton business.
Okay.
But I also can't rule out that they may or may not have a business in Brighton. But I don't believe that they are current business owners in the city of Brighton.
Nor do they reside in Brighton.
That I don't know either. I don't know.
You have no idea who's moving this initiative?
So philosophically, so you know me, one of my favorite phrases in life is "Don't tell me what you know, tell me what you can prove." Right?
Sure.
And I always try to caution myself to, one, deal in absolutes, and two, to make statements that I'm not sure of, right?
I don't want you to speculate.
No,
I wouldn't ask you to speculate.
What I can tell you is the things I do know, and I can tell you the things I suspect, and know this philosophically about me. And I have to tell people this all the time. I don't know often is a perfectly acceptable answer. It's okay to not know anything. I've never met anyone who truly actually knew everything.
Of course.
So
but if you do know something, you can have the guts to say it.
Yeah, you can say it. The group that, interestingly enough, I think the greenhouse, is that the provisioning center in Walled Lake?
Yes, correct.
Jerry Millen's
That's
place?
Jerry Millen's place.
So Jerry Millen has been around with the meetings and everything else. I've had a few conversations with him, and he's the struggling himself, right? It's not, he absolutely he is represented. It's not him behind it, and I think he's deciding on. He's read the ordinance of whether he's even for or against it. So know that, I guess it would bring it back to, right, when you talk about, and this is the other part you asked about accuracy, is whether or not the people who want provisioning centers are in or outside the city of Brighton. Well, I would tell you that several people I've talked to in my community are all for provisioning centers. I think if you really boil down to what one of our good debates on city council was there are some people who believe that the 2018 numbers, which we can verify, right? That is a fact we can look up on the county's website. Well, did they vote to completely legalize marijuana? Or did they vote to legalize marijuana, but they didn't want it in their community?
Yeah, it's hard to draw conclusions on what we're talking about now from those statistics.
Right. And so, and we each have our own. My response to that is I always caution myself, and I'll caution other people as well, to assume what voters are thinking when they cast their ballots, right? You brought up, have people been thoroughly educated and everything else? So that's the shoot for the moon, land on the star thing, right? We want to educate people to make the best informed decisions they can, but you can't force education down people's throats. And
with
you don't
this
know why
ballot, is it an and or for like, because if you're going to vote yes on this, and it automatically is, well, then you're voting yes on dispensaries and provisioning centers. That is a massive difference. Then, I'd be okay with the provisioning center. I just don't want a dispensary in downtown Brighton or in the community.
Well, provisioning center, dispensary are now interchangeable. It's the retail sales.
So you're voting for, that's an and. So remember your and or part? You're saying, hey guys, you vote yes on this. You are allowing not only a minimum of 2,
Correct.
And then as soon as you don't allow the third to open up, they're going to sue you. So you're going to, as many dispensaries that want to come to Brighton are going to try to come to Brighton. When it's big business and we're in the 2396 hub, as you explained earlier, this town could have 6 dispensaries and be a marijuana headquarters.
In the realm of possibilities, it could happen. City councils.
I had no idea they were interchangeable, by the way. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so
because they're very different.
Well, under the medical marijuana laws, they were dispensaries, and under the MRTMA regs, they're provisioning centers, but they're essentially the same thing.
So remember when you said initially in this conversation, you said I didn't want to blow the doors off anything. It's exactly what's happening if this passes, because you're in a whole new Wild West. You're blowing the doors off it.
Yep. And there's some problems inherent within the ordinance, but City Council is also working towards hopefully being able to correct some of those. This is that gray area thing where, well, there's a law, but it also gives us the right to regulate it, right? So it's not an absolute statute that guarantees a free-for-all. City Council is also allowed to, through its police powers, to modify certain portions of it. And the second answer to your question about it could be anybody coming in. There's a strange, which I hadn't seen before. It's in subsection C of the ordinance that says, in order for us to grant a license, the entity had to, and don't hold me to the exact text, but it's basically, this is the and versus or, because I think it's gray even in the statute. There's 2 qualifications in there. One is which they had to be pre-certified by the MRA. Which means, yes, likely somebody who already has a license somewhere else. So it's not going to be a brand new mom and pop small business. And number 2, have a recorded property interest, basically. Some people interpreted that they own property. And I was like, no, you can record a commercial lease at the Register of Deeds. And it becomes now the lawyer language. There's also a 30-day requirement. It's like 30 days within the certification of the ballot language. And I think it could be argued by lawyers on both sides. Does that 30-day requirement apply to both the pre-certification and the recorded property interest? Or is it, right, and versus or on that? But I have, as a capitalist, a little bit of a problem. Even if all this passes, I have a problem with that particular provision because it appears to me at first blush that it may be anti-competitive.
100%. It would benefit the people that are already established, the mega corporations, and it would crush anyone else who wrote the ordinance. I like that you said that it may, because you're not pinning yourself down, but that's exactly what it is, John. That's for sure what it is. We want to protect our interests, get up and running, and crush any type of competition, which is the exact opposite of a free market of capitalism. Yep. The thing that concerns me is the blow the doors open type thing, to be honest. Like when this was presented to me, if we had extremely obvious, well-written laws that could be interpreted correctly by any group of lawyers, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, now it's easy to have these conversations, and we could decide whether we want a provisionary place or a dispensary. We could have all the ordinances already set. That is not happening. So what I'm concerned with November, as a person, like I said, I have friends that use every day, and I have friends that have never in their entire life. You know what I mean? It's not about the marijuana. It's not that I am anti-marijuana. I am anti-blowing the doors off something when you don't understand the effects, when you don't understand what this is going to yield in things. The doorway's open. Now you can try to quickly regulate it back into, what the people want, but you're opening a slippery slope here. And the licensing is a joke. I have a friend who got licensed for medicinal marijuana recently, called a phone number that they got from a card, said, oh yeah, I have headaches, and when I smoke, they go away. They paid a bill over the phone, and then they got their license mailed to them.
Well, you're talking about an individual use
Correct.
license for a medical marijuana card. Okay, that's very, very different.
No, I'm just showing one example.
Oh, yeah, that's very
of
different
what a joke that
from
is.
the licensing from the state
Sure,
of Michigan. And it's the same for a liquor store as like a testing lab.
I
So
agree
that's-
100%, but I'm just saying how ridiculous that is.
Yeah.
I'm a random person on the other end of a phone call telling you that I need this for this.
And let's be honest, that debate was going on for 10 years, right? Is how easy it was to get a medicinal marijuana license.
I had no idea until I witnessed it firsthand.
Okay. Well, it's moot now, right? Because now it's
It's
recreational.
legal. Yeah, 100%.
The only difference, and it was interesting, I talked to a couple of the owners of these provisioning centers when we toured them, who explained to us that the only difference from a consumer standpoint is whether or not they pay taxes on their purchase.
You don't have to have a card to buy from a dispensary? I thought you had to have. No. So it's just because now that it's recreational, legal, anyone can go in.
Yeah, think of it in you will see a lot of parallels in all the licensing and the applications of how this system works, the same as the MLCC for alcohol, right?
It makes sense to me now. So the moment you turn 21, you
still have to be 21 to buy. They're still regulated. The only fun thing I found probably the most interesting is when I toured these provisioning centers were how secure they were.
Well, of course, it's big business.
Well, yeah, but when I talk to the owners, and you talk about the licensing stuff they had to go through, they were like, $1 million doesn't even begin to cut the initial investment to get through the licensing process. He goes, and one of the guys challenged me on it, and I did it myself. You do it yourself. We've had the dispensaries, right, under the medical for over 10 years. He's like, go Google underage sales to minors and find me a case of any owner of any dispensary who made the mistake of selling to a minor. He goes, you're not going to find it. It doesn't happen. The really interesting part I found, it was almost strangely uncomfortable, like I was going into a prison, is in both of these, and I went to a brand new construction and I went to a renovated older building. Both of them had created complete security rooms in the front to where you walk in and it's just a desk and people there that you have to swipe your license and there's a whole clearing process and it goes into a database and everything's locked. Like you can't, I go, this isn't like my liquor store, right? Where I could just walk into the place and everything's there in the front. And it was interesting to see the facts versus what people are out there yelling about youth sales and everything else. There's so much debate that's going on here, and people get, like a lot of things, very, very heated about the issue. I'm just not sold of what our citizens are going to do with this yet. But I agree with you. I think there's significant problems with this ordinance. It's not the ordinance I would want. For our
and if this one gets shut down, it can be new ordinance. They can start another ballot initiative that's much more clear.
Every year.
That defines. Okay, so it's like it's not even that you're closing the door on it for the people that want it. It's that you would like it to be structured in a way that is much easier to perceive, where we know exactly what we're getting into. Someone else could create just. I understand what you're saying, and your point makes sense now. And it's great to hear that they're setting up this type of security. Unfortunately, I think that also ties in the demographic of the people a little bit too, where, liquor stores in certain areas put bars and they have weapons because a certain type of person is more likely to do that. If you're a marijuana dispensary, you're probably more likely to be robbed than if you're a Ace Hardware. I hate to say it. If we looked at the statistics on that, now, if it's more difficult, maybe not. But like we grew up with drug dealers. You grew up with drug dealers. Mm-hmm. Do you think drug dealers probably experience more violent crime than an average citizen, John?
Correct. Yeah.
100%. I think we could cite that. So it's like good to hear that they're going extra steps so that someone can't raid the store, take all their product. I don't know if that's just protecting profits or if it's really caring about people. But
I also don't know that it may be a requirement of MRTMA as well, the regulatory agencies, that you have a segregated initial screening room,
and that would be great.
Products and sales.
That would be great. And really, but it goes back to your capitalistic view of free market, where if you make the requirements to get involved so incredibly high, only the major businesses can do it, well, then you crush every other place. Right. So there's like Heinz ketchup is a great example of they made so many regulations and so many things for what you had to do to produce that condiment that they were acting in the public. Oh, we just want to make sure it's safe. Right. And we just want to protect you. But really, it was an amazing business ploy to absolutely obliterate the competition. They were the only ones that could be successful.
Yeah, we call it barriers to entry.
There we go. You got to be able to read between the lines, right? Like that's what your specialty is. You're able to see these things. So
yeah, I think since we're on the podcast, I think if I can sum it up for me is this, I want people to know this. Instead of grouping everyone, right, as all the drinkers, all the marijuana users, all the people on pharmaceuticals, yes, there are always going to be people in our society who abuse whatever the product or the service is, right? It could be Twinkies, could be licorice, I don't know. But I am cut from that cloth of the founding fathers and individual rights. And if you're not hurting someone else, for the most part, this is a pretty free country. And I'm not for the concept of because one or two people might abuse it, that you take away the rights of everyone. I'm not saying don't regulate them, but that's the same argument you hear from the gun control people, right? Because, 2 or 3 people, or I don't care how many it is, right, abuse a gun, we should take them away from everybody. And I just, for all of these products, I don't believe that. And I believe there is a way, and whether that is provisioning centers just in Pinckney or in Whitmore Lake or wherever, I think the job for us as community leaders, as all of us community, is to evaluate it, make an informed decision. Is it good for our community? Is it right for our community? Is the tax revenue worth the cost? I don't know. You're right. And everybody, the thing I fight against is everybody coming to the table and going, oh, I know. Oh, I know. I know already. And I'm like, how do you know? Right. And so I would just ask for all of our citizens and for all of city council is, don't demonize anybody because they simply want to ask the question, because sometimes I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer. What isn't acceptable is when you fail to go find out the right answer.
100%. I agree with you in that. And like I said, I think the only major concern that I can cite with this is just the fact that it's so unknown. Like the way it's written is so unknown. And that right there that's the slippery slope that we're discussing. And I think that I 100% align with you in what you had just said, that we should be taking all these different viewpoints. We should be looking at things. We shouldn't create stereotypes, but we should also be looking at good people that have integrity, that want to do the right thing, and taking their words is very valuable. Like a murderer's desires may be very different than you and I to raising our family. So we got to weigh so many things in one conversation and then try to make an incredibly difficult decision. And like you said, anyone that can easily make an answer on something like this, well, then you're not looking deep enough. Because if you pursue it to any degree, it is going to require probably work and study and information. And again, the thing that we'll end this on is just the perspective of, I think the blowing the doors open is the danger, not the fact that at some point a provisionary center might be a great thing for the city of Brighton, or maybe a dispensary. It's not about that. It's the way that it is currently structured does not really benefit anyone except the interest that wrote the ordinance. You would agree with that?
I would.
Excellent. Well, John, this has been an amazing. We've shot an hour and a half of dialogue. We've shot a full-length feature film here.
It's gone by fast.
100%. I've enjoyed this dialogue thoroughly. What I'd like to wrap this up with is, you have a local practice in the community, your goals, your visions for the future. You're a city council member right now. Do you have aspirations to go higher? Let's lay out, like, if I were to interview you in 5 years and things worked out a way that you envisioned, what does that look like? Like, what do you see moving forward?
That's the hardest question you've asked all day.
Perfect way to end the podcast then. What do you see moving forward, John?
I think it's highly doubtful that I'll still be on city council. I don't have any aspirations to go any higher. I think sticking where I started, I believe the founding fathers imbued an obligation to step up and serve, but it was never permanent. It was to stand a post, provide for your community, then go back to the private sector.
That's exactly what it was.
I have no desire to be a career politician. It is just not how I am wired. I also love adventures. Even if I take my concept of very, very different people in this country, we're all wired differently, right? We have different systems of beliefs. Our preferences are different. There are some people who can be born in one town, go to school in that town, marry the man or woman, their high school sweetheart, have the same job for 30 or 40 years, retire, grandkids, great-grandkids, and never leave that town. And they are the happiest people you ever meet in your life. And there are other people who are adventurers, right? And I describe them as chapters. I born in Michigan, lived in California, lived on the west side of the state, different schools. I've gotten a chance to have different types of restaurant jobs, the road warrior job, running my own practice, now in-house general counsel. I love chapters. I love adventure. If it makes me a risk taker, then great, right? As long as they're educated or informed risks, I'm an entrepreneur. Economics calls us risk neutral, right, versus risk averse. 5 years from now, happily married, still cooking. I don't think I can hold out much longer. My wife rides dressage. We have 2 horses. According to her, she has 2 horses. They are the one thing that is not marital property. And we have boarded for forever. And I know in the bottom of her heart she would love to have her own small ranch. Being a city guy, a lot of people find that hilariously ironic. But if all goes well, 5 years from now, probably on a small ranch somewhere, whether here it's in Michigan or going back towards the desert, or if I can find a way to make a ranch on a Caribbean island and have my own little bed and breakfast where I can cook for you and come hang out. My wife can ride in the arena out back. That would be perfect. So.
You know what? If there was the tribalism from way back in the day, the people that planted and stayed in one area, you're the nomad. You're the guy that wants to see life. You're the guy that wants to explore everything this thing has to offer before the ride is over, right? It was really cool to hear that. And honestly, throughout this podcast, what I've learned about you is you're the type of person we do need in politics. Whether you want to hear that or not, it's the people that don't really want to be there, but they're trying to interpret things based on the way they should be and not based on a preconceived notion or going in with I already know the answer. I don't care what you have to say. That right there does not move things in the right direction. You have taken an approach about listen, you might not align with me, but I'm not obligated to a foundation. I'm trying to interpret as we go. And that's a difficult process. And I think when you have people that are already set in their ways that go into a conversation, it's incredibly difficult to make any progress. And actually, we're seeing that now in society more than ever. It's no matter what information I could present you, no matter what we could lay out, no matter how we could debate. Back in the day, we respected debate. Mm-hmm. If you and I had, before this podcast, we had a debate about people on a bell curve and extremes and examples and about trajectory and aim, that type of debate is eye-opening. I was taking in your perspectives. I was considering the point. I was trying to understand why were you painting it from this lens and why was I from this lens? And through those conversations, we both grow. Yep. It's never just one person if they're both perceiving.
And we reached a common understanding at the same answer.
100%. So that type of energy can fix things. Mm-hmm. That is the basis of the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. That is the basis of the melting pot of the nation, right? And we have to be able to also call things wrong when they're wrong. We have to be able to look at someone that is a horrible person and say, well, we're going to take your viewpoint a little bit less. Hitler, okay? Right. What your desires are not ours. So, we can maybe understand your psychosis, but we're not going to agree with your decisions, right? These type of things need to come back into society, and I think we demonstrated that well today. We aligned on many things, and we might have been different on many things, but it's the conversation that matters. It's the civil discourse. So I've thoroughly enjoyed having you on the podcast today. We have an hour and a half for people to enjoy. If anyone wanted to reach out to you, let's say they were, I don't know if you're even interested in new clients or anything like that, but everyone hears this, you're not, that's
no new clients.
So then honestly, John, it was enjoyable having you in the podcast today, and anything else you want to say, and then we'll wrap this up.
I've always been open to hearing from everybody. You can find me, my picture, I think it's without a beard. But
I gotta see that. I'm gonna Google it after.
It's awful. I'm not artistic or photogenic. But you can find my picture and my city website as a city councilman, even on the City of Brighton webpage. Easy to find through there. So this has been a pleasure. And thank you for the audience. Thank you for listening. And I'll leave it at this. To your point, the debate is everything. The ability to have it, I think we continue to lose, and we become poorer for it. So
100%. Perfect way to end the episode. Thank you again, sir.